Hello everyone and welcome back to our series on the Cognex In-Sight Explorer vision system using EasyBuilder. In this particular video we're just going to kind of talk about the different inspection tools, and we're going to go through and discuss some of those tools and some of the tools that we're going to discuss later on in our video series. I want us to kind of take some time to really dig deep into these tools and a better understanding for our own sake, as well as just for a better understanding of the tools. So Cognex offers these particular tools, um, tool sections, if you will, that are available within their software. So for instance, like presence absence measurement for measuring the part sizes, and we have the ability to change the software so that we can either measure it out in pixels, millimeters, or even inches. You can count things, so if you have like blobs or things like that within the part, maybe you're looking for a certain amount of capacitors on a circuit board or something along those lines. You have the ability to measure those out, um, or excuse me, count those out. You can measure them as well, obviously. ID, so an ID feature, which should be like your identification tools. We have the ability to use like barcodes, uh, data matrices, and those types of things. Geometric, so we can kind of view like your arcs and stuff like that within a circle, or maybe the circle itself. Math logic tools, depending on your particular task, sometimes those are used and sometimes those aren't. They have a tendency to kind of use a type of like a mathematical equation or formula within the project. A lot of times, if you're using a lot of math and logic in your project, you wouldn't be using EasyBuilder, you would be using spreadsheet programming. Plot, again, kind of goes along with your geometry, math, and logic, but it's used for kind of plotting different little pieces within the image for calculation purposes. Once again, it's usually used in spreadsheet items. Filters, so filters kind of goes in a little bit of a more broader sense. Um, we have the ability to use filters to determine how we need to maybe change our grayscale or change our coloration. So we could maybe filter out the red light or filter out the blue light kind of thing. We have the ability to filter out, generally speaking, we use a lot of monochromatic stuff, so we have the ability to filter out and make it more binarized, meaning it's black or white. It's not got any type of like shade of gray in it. It's just a black or white from the best judgment of the vision sensor itself. Defects, so particular part defects that you want to have, that you want the camera to really kind of focus in on. And then calibration, so we're able to use a type of calibrating system to calibrate our vision system. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about mainly in the presence absence feature, or in the presence absence tool section, is going to be our brightness, contrast, patterns, pixel count, blob, edge, circle, and sharpness. And I'm going to focus probably the most on the presence absence type of tool, so there might be 2 or 3 videos going through some of these different things, because generally speaking, presence absence is going to be some of the stuff that we use the most of. That's because the applications usually require most of these, whether it be in quality checks, robotic usages, or just the presence absence of a particular part and how it's oriented within our system. A lot of times brightness and contrast are used kind of in a hand-in-hand kind of thing, even though they are vastly different. They do kind of go hand-in-hand a lot. Patterns, we've talked about patterns in the past where we use it to kind of find parts. Pixel count, that's exactly what it says. It's going to count the amount of pixels within what we're looking for. Blobs kind of do similar to the pixels, but they're not a pixel count. They just kind of look for the blob and the presence of it. Edges, we talked about edges before. Circles, same thing. We kind of talked a little bit about circle finds before earlier as well. And sharpness also goes kind of hand in hand with the brightness and contrast as well, even though, again, vastly different. In the measurement section, we'll talk a little bit about distance and circle diameter because of the parts that we're, in a sense, inspecting. Um, The distance and circle diameter will kind of give you a general understanding. Once you have that, you can kind of go ahead and use that for other programming in within the measurement tool feature window. Counting, we'll talk a little bit about blob count, edge count, pattern count. Um, Again, blob count's going to be, it's just going to simply count the number of blobs that were within that. Edge count will give us kind of a general understanding of counting the number of edges that it crosses over, and pattern count's counting the number of patterns that we assigned it to count. Identification, again, kind of talked about that briefly a little bit earlier on. We have 1D code read, 2D code read. We also have the ability to use like read postal code. We'll kind of talk a little bit about those. We might even go a little bit more in depth in understanding what those different kinds of barcodes mean and how we kind of can differentiate between them and understand them. Geometry tools, we'll talk a little bit about point to point, line intersections, circles, and line inspections. Math and logic, we'll talk a little bit about like the math, logic, trend, and statistics. Again, we're going to probably briefly cover that information. We may not do a whole lot with it. We may save that more for our spreadsheet later on down the road, as most of those tools, again, we would see more in spreadsheet programming. Plot tools, again, talk briefly about circle, cross, and region. And once again, we might reserve some of that a little bit more for spreadsheet programming as well. Image filtering, we will definitely talk about point, scene correction, and transform, as some of those are used to binarize, some of those are used to add maybe more grayscale to it should we need that, or they might reduce the grayscale as well. Excuse me. We'll talk briefly about the defect detection, such as like surface flaw and edge. Once again, that's something more or less we might reserve a little bit more for a spreadsheet, but we will briefly discuss some of those. And then calibration, we'll talk a little bit about endpoint, what it's used for, and how it's used within the program. For the most part, that takes care of everything that we were going to talk about in this video. So thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for going through these different tools.